to Alan's Italy. Tonight we are going to be continuing with the show we started last week when we got about 1/3 of the way through the show that was intended to be a two-part show on Rome. So I'm hoping we can finish it tonight. It's possible that we may have to go even further into next week, but then again, I'm still young and there are still hopefully many shows ahead of us, ahead of me, so I hope that we can do it. If not, we'll see. First, I'd like to explain a few things. First of all, you may have noticed that at the beginning of the last show, a very strange thing happened. After the music and the montage of pictures that you saw at the beginning of each show, there was, I was looking at my screen and I saw a screen that I'd never seen before. And it was very strange, and I was trying very hard to get it to work, and I couldn't get it to work. And there was a little delay at the beginning when things were a little weird. So I could just tell you that this show is done live. It's done in a studio that adjoins a community center. So there's all kinds of extraneous noises going on. One of them is happening now, and they're in the middle of preparing for a show that's going to be going on tonight. And the music is loud and the screaming is loud. And you could hear what's going on there. I went in there a few minutes ago and asked them to try to keep it down. And ever since I did that, they've been actually speaking a little louder than they were even before. So, you know, as I said, this is a live show. My engineer, Alan, does an amazing job. I try to do a good job as well. But there are factors beyond our control. And this is something that we all kind of have to get used to. So, you know, and I have these shows on YouTube. And when I got home with the DVD from the show, I was going to edit out that part at the beginning, which was kind of showed me in my worst light, but that's the way it is, and I decided to leave it in because you know, what you see on YouTube, if you're seeing it now on YouTube, is not simply Alan's Italy, but it's also a chance for you to see what it's like to put on a TV show weekly in a studio like this, where everyone who's here is not being paid. We're all volunteers, and this is the entire experience. So what you see is what you get. And if we hear some weird sounds tonight from music, a few minutes ago they were playing Michael Jackson's song Beat It, which I love that song, but you know, not when I'm doing my show. So I asked them for a little bit of understanding between 5 and 6, and we'll see what happens. But there might be some sounds, and if there are, I apologize, but that's the way it is. I would just like to tell you that if you're watching the show live tonight, just to let you know, Christina Varga's show next Thursday night at 10 p.m. on WPAT Channel 23. I will be interviewed on that show. So if you are getting this feed live now, you'll know that next Thursday night you might be able to see the interview. I don't know what to expect. I've never seen the show. I wanted to see her show last night at 10, but I fell asleep because I wasn't feeling well. I had a slight cold and I wanted to rest up, so I fell asleep before the show came on. But if you'd like to see me being interviewed and I don't know what to expect, please tune in next Thursday night, 10 p.m. on this same channel. So here we go. And we're going to start with where we left off on the last show. So let me go back to the beginning here. This was the picture that I showed you at the beginning of the last show. This is a picture of the Colosseum. We're coming back to this in a few minutes, but let's just go to the map of Rome that I had showed you, and we left off the tour right over here at the Vatican Museum. And just before I got a chance to show you some of the things in the Vatican Museum, the show ended. So we're going to be going through the Vatican Museum. We're then going into St. Peter's Cathedral. We're then going over here to the river, over here to the Castell Santangelo. We're going to cross the river and go over here to the Campidoglio, which is right over here, and then we're going to go through the Roman Forum and do many of the Roman ruins. So we're going to be touring a lot of ancient Rome tonight and go on to the Piazza Navona, and we'll see how far we get. So let us begin with that original picture that I had of the Vatican museums. This is a picture of the Vatican museums, and I indicated to you that we enter the Vatican museums at the upper left-hand corner over there. That's where the entrance is, and we're going to be going down that long corridor on the left of the screen, going through some of the museums. But, you know, when you go to the Vatican Museum is a giant treasure trove of incredible art, and no human being could possibly see all there is to see. And whenever I give people a tour of the Vatican museums, I usually focus on just a couple of things, and that's what I'm going to be doing tonight. I'm going to start with a little sculpture in the what's called the octagonal cortile, which is the eight-sided courtyard of the Pio Clementine Museum, some sculpture, and then we're going to walk through the museum to get to the Raphael rooms, which are magnificent, then to the Sistine Chapel, then into St. Peter's. So let us begin, and this is where we began last time. These are the steps that you could go up if you wanted to get to the main floor of the Vatican museums. And this is what the steps looked like many years ago. Now they have an elevator, and I would suggest the elevator because this is quite a grueling way of beginning a long tour. This is what it looks like inside the courtyard of the museum. The museum actually has two courtyards. This is one of them. One is a grassy part, and the other is a concrete part, which looks more like a parking lot. But this is what one of them looks like. And you can either go into this courtyard or view it from one of the windows. It's very pretty. People kind of go out there just to see what it looks like. There isn't much to see. There's a couple of things. But it's a fun place to kind of stay and hang out and relax. And this is what the other part of the courtyard looks like. And you can see that this is more of a parking lot than anything else. That's a view of St. Peter's, the dome of St. Peter's, from the Vatican Museum. And this is the first major piece of sculpture that that you can see when you go to the octagonal courtyard. And this is one of the most famous pieces of sculpture ever found in Rome. This is the Laocoon, which is the Roman version of an ancient Greek sculpture that was probably done in bronze. And this was found in the very early 16th century in Rome. And Michelangelo happened to be visiting the Pope that day, and somebody came in and told the Pope that we think we found something really extraordinary. And Michelangelo happened to be there and said, "May I go and join you?" And he went with another famous artist, and they looked at it and they said, "Yes, this is indeed the Laocoon, and this is one of the most beautiful pieces of sculpture in the world." This is one of the two major pieces of sculpture we'll be looking at tonight. The other you'll see in a little while is Michelangelo's Pieta. So this is where I take people when I go to the Vatican Museum. Start here at this extraordinary piece of sculpture, and then we go to other pieces of sculpture. This is another sculpture in the museum. That's what it looks like a little more from a distance. And, you know, we just kind of wander around and look at some of the wonderful sculpture. And then you take a peek outside at the courtyard, and you see that. And this is another exhibit in the museum. And just to show you, I came back to this picture because I wanted to show you that we're now going to be walking through this very long courtyard, this very long hallway. It starts, we're about over here, right on the left corner, and we're going to be walking all the way down this very long courtyard to get to this area here, which are the Raphael rooms, and then we're going down into the Sistine Chapel, and then we're going to come out of the Sistine Chapel into St. Peter's Cathedral. So that's the plan. And along the way of this very long hallway, the ceilings are extraordinarily beautifully decorated, and this is some of the things you see along the way until you wind up right about over there, which is where the Raphael rooms are located, up on top. And this is what one of the rooms looks like. These are the apartments that Julius II, the Pope who was, he was Pope from in the early 16th century. There goes the music again. So that's going to come in intermittently, I would guess, over the next 45 minutes. But this is one of the rooms look like. These were all painted by Raphael right around the time that Michelangelo was doing the Sistine Chapel in around from 1508 to 1512. This is the Sala de Signatura, which is it's called that because it's the signature room where important documents are signed. And that fresco over on the right side is the very famous School of Athens, which is my favorite piece of all the pieces in this area. And this is a very close-up view of the School of Athens done by Raphael. And there's a couple of parts of this fresco that I like very, very much. One of them are the two, this is supposed to be ancient Greece with the famous Greek philosophers and scientists, and the two people right here in the front. On the left is Plato, on the right is Aristotle, but the two really wonderful pieces of portraiture are located right over here on the lower part here. When this was originally done by Raphael, he left out that person. I always go too far with that. Let me go back. There's Plato and Aristotle, but if you go back a little more, you come to the fellow sitting there. And that fellow sitting there leaning on his hand is Michelangelo. And when Raphael was working in his rooms, the rooms upstairs, Michelangelo was doing the Sistine ceiling. And he gained such respect for him that he decided to put him into his painting. And that's him leaning on his hand and on the left side over there. And then if you go to the other side, right over here, let me see if I could get there a little closer and do a little more of a zoom. This always is a disaster for me, but I'm going to see if I can get as close as I can to this. This portrait right here, I don't know if you could see the pointer, but this face right here is the face of Raphael himself. Many painters, whenever they did a monumental piece of work, put their portrait in there. And here's little Raphael, somewhere in his 20s, believe it or not. His very sweet face, I always thought he had a very sweet-looking face, looking out at the audience, at the viewers. So that's what he looks like. And that's the School of Athens, a very wonderful piece of art. Here's another piece of art by Raphael in that same room. And now we go to the Sistine ceiling. This is the Sistine Chapel from a distance and without any people in it, which is highly unusual. The Sistine Chapel, as you might expect, being one of the great pieces of art in all of Western civilization, is always crowded. Not only crowded, but jammed to the gills. And people like to talk about things, which makes sense, and there are always guards going around shushing people. There are three things you should be focusing on when you go to the Sistine Chapel. One of them is the ceiling itself, which you can see right there, which is magnificent. The second thing is the painting all the way at the very end, you could see there, all the way at the very back of where the Sistine Chapel is located, at what's called the High Altar, where Michelangelo did a piece of art called The Last Judgment much later in his career. And the other thing you should focus on are the paintings around the wall. Well, again, I'm using my pointer now. See, these are very famous paintings that were done in the Sistine Chapel when it was first built during the late 15th century. And these were there before Michelangelo actually did his ceiling. At the time, the ceiling did not consist of what it looks like now. It just consisted of some, I think it was a blue background with some, some stars showing. And he, of course, painted over that and put this ceiling in, which made it, of course, one of the great pieces of art in Western civilization. This is what it looks like. And it's very hard to see the ceiling because it's up high and it's hard to see. So, you know, some people, there are benches around the periphery of the Sistine Chapel, and a lot of people kind of lie on the bench and try to look up. Very hard to see anything. You know, and the best place to see the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is if you happen to be in there alone, or if you get home and look in one of the books, you can see, you know, you can really get a focus on what that is. But this is a magnificent chapel and a magnificent piece of art to look at. Here's one more view of it. I'll try to get a little closer with that. And that's what it looks like looking into the Sistine Chapel. There's another view of it with a very close-up view of the Last Judgment, which is quite a beautiful piece of art by Michelangelo. Okay, now here's St. Peter's Cathedral, and when you come out of the Sistine Chapel, you're right next to St. Peter's Cathedral. It used to be that you walked out of a door and you were in Piazza San Pietro, but unfortunately now it's a convoluted series of hallways and steps, so it's a little more difficult to get to this point. But once you get to this point, you get into this area, which is the Piazza, where on Sundays sometimes the Pope addresses an audience from his private apartments. There are the Swiss Guard, which are the Pope's personal guard. And this is, in my opinion, this is my favorite piece of sculpture that I've ever seen, and certainly that Michelangelo has ever done, although that's disputed because many people like David and Moses and some of his other great pieces of sculpture. But he did this when he was in his mid-20s, imagine that, in the very early 16th century. And this is his conception of the Pieta, which is an iconic figure of the Virgin Mary with Jesus Christ having been taken down from the cross, and she's, of course, in this incredible period of sadness. And this is what it looks like. He did this, and when he first did this piece, it was located in St. Peter's Cathedral in one of the chapels, and he used to go at night and take a look at this to see what people were saying about it. And some people happened to be there one night from Florence, and when they saw it, they said, "Oh yes, this is done by that famous sculptor in Florence," and they didn't mention Michelangelo's name. They mentioned somebody else's name, and Michelangelo is off to the side saying, "Oh my goodness, you know, nobody even knows that I'm the one that did it." So he snuck back into the chapel at night, and he put a sash along the front of the Virgin Mary, and on the sash it said that Michelangelo Buonarroti of Florence did this sculpture. So people can now look at it and see that, although it's not a question about who did this. This is, everybody knows that this is one of the great pieces of sculpture done by Michelangelo. And it's now behind plate glass because somebody got in there once, a fanatical person, crazy person, about 30 years ago, and tried to break it. So now it's behind glass, and that's, you know, a good place for it. Okay, so we now come out of St. Peter's Cathedral, and we're walking along the Tiber, and we wind up at the Castell Santangelo. That's what it's called now, but when it was built in ancient times, it was intended for the tomb of Hadrian. And this was used in medieval times by the popes when they wanted to escape some of the barbarian hordes that came down from the north, and they wanted a place to seek sanctuary, and they came into here, and you can see that it's quite a fortified looking castle. You can see some of the things located in the castle itself. There are some interesting things and interesting walkways you can see there. This is what it looks like underneath in this, you know, dark and dingy castle, now lit by electric lights, thank goodness, but in those days was lit by torches. But here's the best part of going into this castle and going to the very top of the castle, which is a very, again, a big climb, and if you have trouble walking, this is not the place to go. But if you look in one direction, this is one of your views, and this is an extraordinary view of Rome, looking to the, let me see if I could get this straight. I think this is looking to the south at St. Peter's Cathedral off in the distance. This is another view of Rome, looking across the river at a site that we'll be looking at more closely later. This is the Victor Emmanuel Monument right in front of the Roman Forum on the Piazza Venezia. And you get this amazing view, as you can see here. Look at this view. This gives you a really beautiful view of Rome. And that's the main reason I tell people to go up to the Castell Santangelo. There are other places to get a great view, and this is certainly one of them. This is a model of ancient Rome that occurs, if you want to see this model, which is really unbelievable. It's a model of what Rome looked like in 300 AD in a museum called the, oh my goodness gracious, there we go again. This is what happens when you become 64, and I did not write it down. I think it's the Museum of the City of Rome. I'm going to check that out and get back to you next time. But there's a museum that's located in the southern portion of the city, and this is what Rome looked like during ancient times, and it's amazing. And you can see right there in the middle is the Colosseum, the way it looked then, not the way it looks now, which, you know, is quite broken up. And off to the left there, you see a stadium where chariot races took place. That's the Circus Maximus, and just above it is the Palatine Hill, and just beyond that, right in this area over here, is the Roman Forum. So this is, if you wanted to, you know, and you can't just walk around Rome without looking at what it looked like during ancient times, because all you're seeing is rubble and ruins. And if you really want to get a good idea of to what this looked like, you have to look at models and reconstructions like this. And that's what I would suggest. And throughout today's show, I will be interspersing what it looked like then. And some of the pictures I got off the internet are truly amazing. So this is where we're going to start our tour. And this is a piazza called the Piazza Bocca della Verita. And we're going to be looking at a couple of the monuments in this piazza. But the piazza gets its name from this stone face. This stone face is known as the Bocca della Verita, which is literally translated into the face of truth. And during medieval times, people were told that if we wanted to determine if you're telling the truth or not, you should take your hand and stick it in that mouth, and if your hand comes out in one piece, you're telling the truth. If not, don't stick your hand in there. And of course, when they, you know, anybody who would do this, their hand would certainly come out and in one piece, because that, you know, that's just superstitious. But people during medieval times were very superstitious, and they were sometimes afraid. A person was indeed lying, and, you know, the magistrate wanted to know if the person was actually lying. They would say, well, stick your hand in the mouth, and they would say, oh my God, no, it'll just gobble up my hand, and that's how they would tell. So this is called the Bocca della Verita, and they named the piazza after this. And this is one of the pieces of monuments. Look, there's a, you know, I didn't take the telephone over here, and I may have a telephone call. So let me get up for a moment from my chair. How do you like this? This is an exciting night. So I'm going to get this phone call, and we'll see who it is. Good evening, and welcome to Alan's Italy. Hi.
So my name is Sherry, and I just saw that sculpture of the mouth, and I think was that used in a movie with Audrey Hepburn?
Roman Holiday. Is that the movie?
Maybe.
I know of two movies that I'm familiar with in Rome. One of them is Roman Holiday, which I think that's the one, because I have a teacher at Bard College that always refers to that. So I think that yes, that's the answer to your question. I think that was Roman Holiday. And one of the things I did last week was the Trevi Fountain, which is the other famous movie, Three Coins in the Fountain. So yeah, they use Rome a lot for very famous movies.
Well, I saw it and I thought, oh, this is very familiar, so I just thought I'd call in and ask.
Well, that's a great time to ask a question, and thank you very much for calling.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed the show.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Bye.
Wow, how do you like that? I am absolutely astounded and thrilled, and that's the way it should be, you know? This is an interactive show, and I think that if you see something on my presentation that you find interesting, that, you know, just give me a call and ask the question. And that's like, as I told you last time, I was a teacher. This is like a great thing for a teacher, to be able to make a presentation and have, you know, the students, or the viewer in this case, you know, call up and say, well, you know, I'd like to ask a question about it. So please do so. And don't, you know, originally I said don't call until it's later in the show, but now I say call anytime, because I think this is just wonderful. So this is called the Temple of Hercules, and this is a temple from ancient Rome. And of course, it's very well preserved. And if you remember what I said last week about the Pantheon, any ancient monument that stayed pretty much intact as the way it looked during ancient times was a church during the Middle Ages. And this is one of those buildings that was indeed a church. So it's a really beautifully preserved monument. And here's another one that's also very well preserved. The Temple of Fortuna Portunas. This is a very nice looking monument that I guess also served as a church. I'm not sure about that, but these are the two pieces of Roman monuments that survive in the Piazza della Verita. Okay, we then go down the street from this spot, and we wind up at one of the other famous Roman monuments from ancient times, the Theater of Marcellus. And this is a better view of it. This was a theater that was built by Augustus, the first Roman emperor, for a nephew of his who had died, and I think he probably built it in his honor. And you could see that the bottom part is the ancient Roman theater, and the top part is an apartment building that was built later on this spot. So Romans have a tendency to use things over again. And as you pass this spot, you eventually wind up right here. And I'm going to show you this video. And I don't think we need the sound on this. So we could drop the sound, and I'll kind of dictate what's going on here. Okay, so here's the video. This is the Campidoglio, and that's me giving a tour of this area to my friends Randy and David. And there's a bus going by. This is a very congested area of Rome, and that what you're looking at now are the steps of the Campidoglio. This was the capital. That's a church over there on the left, the Church of Articelli. And the Campidoglio was the ancient capital of ancient Rome, and was later turned into a beautiful piazza with these long steps designed by Michelangelo during the 16th century. And here's another view of those steps. And again, this is kind of daunting if you have difficulty walking up steps, because you have to walk up these steps here to get to the very top. And once you get to the top, there's a copy of the statue, the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius, which is now in one of the museums. And this is what happens when you go around to the other side. The piazza is beautiful, but when you go around to the back of the Campidoglio, you come to this spot, and this is the view you get of the Roman Forum. This is one of the real evocative scenes in Rome at the current time. It is mostly in ruins, although there are some pretty well intact buildings. One of them is the arch on the left side. That's the Arch of Septimius Severus. And there's a temple a little further along there, which is very hard to see, the Temple of Vesta. And there's a three-columned ruin straight ahead, which is the Temple of Pollux and Castor. And the building on the right side, on the extreme side of the right side here, this is the Temple of Saturn. and most of it is ruins. And again, if you really want to get a view of what ancient Rome looked like, this is what you would do. You would get one of these things off the internet, and if you were alive 2,000 years ago, this is what you would see. This is what ancient Rome looked like 2,000 years ago. And the reddened buildings are the highlighted buildings that compose the Roman Forum. And some of the buildings that I pointed out to you, this is the arch that we will, first of all, this is where we were standing, right up here, right next to this building, which was the tabularium where they kept the records. And we were looking straight down this way at the Arch of Septimius Severus. Right over here was the Roman Senate, the Curia. Right over here is the Basilica Aemilia, and over here is the Basilica Julia. This is the Temple of Saturn that I pointed out to you, that we'll take a closer look at later. And this is the Temple of Pollux and Castor, and this was the Temple of Vesta, and this is where the Vestal Virgins lived. And here was the Regia, where the Pontus Maximus lived. And this is what the Roman Forum looked like 2,000 years ago. Pretty amazing. It's very, very beautiful. This is another view of what the Roman Forum looked like. Look at that. This is from the other angle. So we were looking at it from the top of the Campidoglio. If you went down into the Roman Forum to the other side of the Forum, this is what it would look like. And it's pretty amazing. There's the arch over there. There's the Temple of Saturn on the left side. Now this over here, you see this kind of platform? This was called the rostra in those days, and this is where the famous Roman orators made their speeches. The famous speech by Mark Antony, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. It was made from that spot. He was standing up there and addressing the people of Rome just after the assassination of Julius Caesar. So that's where all the famous speeches were made, and the populace kind of gathered over there, and this is what the Roman Forum looked like 2,000 years ago. Pretty amazing. There's another view of it, looking again from where the Campidoglio is, looking towards into the Roman Forum. This, I believe, is the Temple of Julius Caesar, and this was built on the spot where Julius Caesar was assassinated. Well, actually not assassinated. He was assassinated, as I mentioned last time, in the vicinity of Largo, Argentina. This is where he was burned. You know, in Rome, they cremated people after they had died, and this is where he was cremated, and a temple was built in his honor. Look how beautiful that is. This is what the Roman Forum looked like 2,000 years ago. And this is back to the way it is now. A little disappointing, I have to admit, because this is not quite as beautiful as it looked. But this is what the Roman Forum looks like now. If you went down into it, this is what you'd see. We didn't go down into it in 2010, although I've been into the Roman Forum many, many times in the past. But we were walking around the periphery. The best place to see the Roman Forum is to walk around the periphery, around the raised portion that you'll be seeing in a few minutes. This is another view of the Roman Forum that I found. And look at this. This is just extraordinary. So, this is beautiful. These buildings all the way up on top, you can see on the left side, are not part of the Roman Forum. That's part of the Palatine Hill, which is where the emperors and many of the senators and wealthy people lived. But this is what it looks like with, people milling about. And I just can't take my eyes off this view because it's just so beautiful. This is another view. This is a reconstruction of what the Circus Maximus looked like. And that's that long arena right here, where if you saw Ben-Hur, this is where the chariot race took place, right in here. And they went right around here like that. Of course, that one in Ben-Hur was recreated. But people would sit along here, and the emperor would watch the chariot races from his palace right up here. This is the palace of Domitian, which was a Roman emperor who built this palace, and it overlooks this arena, and these are all the buildings of the Palatine Hill right up here. So this is what the Roman ancient Rome looked like. There's an aqueduct over here, which was the water system that came into Rome. We'll be talking more about aqueducts in later shows. Here's another view of the Roman Forum. I just have a few views here of what the Roman Forum looked like. This building that, the ruins here are the Basilica Aemilia, and that was, buildings that was one of the buildings that lined one of the sides of the Forum, and there were, business took place in the temples, and they had stores along here with stalls that sold a variety of products. This building over here was the Temple of Pollux and Castor. We'll look at that a little more later. This is what the Basilica Aemilia looked like when it was still a building during ancient times. So this is what it would have been like if you were living in those times. This is what it would have looked like inside the building. And of course, you can't really get the feeling of what it looks like now because it's, in ruins. Excuse me. That's the Temple of Pollux and Castor now, and that's what it looked like in ancient times. This is the Temple of Saturn over there with the multiple columns over on the extreme left. There's another view of it, and there's a really, good view of it. The way it looks now, pretty well preserved considering what it's been through, with people breaking up the ancient monuments and using the stone to build the medieval churches and other buildings. This is what it looked like during ancient times. There's a picture of me, and the reason I showed you this is not to, because I'm very vain, although I might be, but not. You can't tell it from this picture. But this is the walkway along the periphery of the Roman Forum, where you get really the best view of what the Roman Forum looks like, because you're above it and you can see more details than you can when you're down below. This is a view looking back at the Roman Forum towards the Tabularium. That's what the Tabularium would have looked like 2,000 years ago. And that's another view of the Roman Forum. If you look up to the top there, you'll see the Palatine Hill and some of the famous buildings that were up there. Oh, I know I showed you this. This building over here was the Temple of Vesta, and this is where the Vestal Virgins would keep the eternal flame of Rome alive. There was a flame that always burned, and one of their jobs was to keep that flame alive, and that's what the temple looked like 2,000 years ago. A very beautiful little temple. Here's another view of the Roman Forum. This is another view, looking much further towards the Colosseum. We're walking towards the Colosseum now, and if you look down, that's what you see. This is the Temple of Venus and Rome, which gives us somewhat of a view of what that looked like with all the columns around it. And here's what the Colosseum looked like. The Colosseum we see now is in ruins, but that's what it looked like 2,000 years ago. Pretty amazing, huh? And those pointy things up on the top, during sunny weather, there was an awning that went over the Colosseum so that it would stay out of the sun. The sun would stay out of people's eyes. So that was, and that's what it looked like. And a lot of sports arenas now are patterned after the Colosseum, with the many entrances and the ramps going up to the various levels of the Colosseum. And that's, of course, what the Colosseum, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon how you look at, looks like now. And the next several pictures will be what the Colosseum looks like inside. If you were one of the customers viewing one of the events in the Colosseum, this is what you'd be seeing. And this is what the stands look like around it and the interior of it. And here's another view, a closer up view of what the audience must have seen, or what you could see from the floor of the Colosseum looking towards the audience. Another view of the Colosseum from inside, yet another view. And that music you hear in the background is a Motown sound. What is that? Heatwave by Martha and the Vandellas. So, you know, this show is everything to all people. This is, you know, Italian music, Italian scenes, and also Motown sounds from the 1960s. And I'm almost tempted to sit here and listen to it a little bit, except that we can't because we have to move on. You know, the Colosseum was adorned with beautiful mosaics, and this is one of them that is still in existence. Quite amazing, right? And this is what it looked like if you got to the top of the Colosseum and looked back towards the Roman Forum. This is what you'd be seeing. I believe that arch over there on the left side is the Arch of Titus. This is a view of what it looked like walking around the Colosseum, where people, you know, people came in and they milled around, and then when the show was about to start, everybody went up to their seats, kind of like what it is going to a sports arena now, you know, Yankee Stadium or Citi Field. That's what it looked like underneath the stands, with people kind of coming in on the steps and then, you know, getting to their seats. This is a view of one of the great arches in ancient Rome. This is the Arch of Constantine that you could see from one of the top levels of the Colosseum. Again, this is not intended to show you a picture of me, but to show you a picture of what the Arch of Constantine looks like from a distance. This is the Piazza that's right in front of the Colosseum. And this scene over here shows you these gladiators, you know, the pretend gladiator. They dress up in gladiatorial garb, and they have people taking pictures with them. And they, you know, people are supposed to give them a $5 bill or a $10 bill to have their picture taken with these mock gladiators. There's a picture of Laura and me, and behind us is the Colosseum. And this is the street known as the Via dei Fori Imperiali, which is the street you go down going from the Colosseum to the Piazza Venezia. And this is one of the ancient Roman ruins that lie alongside of that. And that's another view of what the Via dei Fori Imperiali looks like walking down towards it. And we go a little further and we come to Trajan's Forum and Trajan's Market. And this is what it looks like now. This is what the Emperor Trajan built this forum, and the market's behind it. And it's very well preserved. As you could see, there's a lot to see there. And people just mill about and look at all these amazing ruins. This is what Trajan's Forum looked like 2,000 years ago. Pretty amazing. Just get a look at that. Excuse me for a minute, I must take a drink of water, but one of the evocative scenes there, excuse me, is Trajan's Column. And that's the column you see over there on the left in front of that big building. Trajan's Column was built at the time of Trajan to honor his military achievements. He was a great military conqueror, and all of his various conquests are sculpted along that column. And you could go inside that column, and I think there are steps that take you to the very top of that, and you get a pretty nice view of what Rome looks like. There's another view of Trajan's Forum, and you can see the column over there on the left, and there's a better view of Trajan's Column right in the center. And it's extraordinarily well preserved. And what shocks me more than anything is not so much that these are amazing things to look at, but that they've managed to survive. So this has survived, and it's really one of the amazing sites in ancient Rome. Now, we take a slight detour off the ancient Roman ruins to take a look at this church. This is the church of San Pietro in Vincoli, which literally translates into the Church of St. Peter in Chains. And this is the church named after St. Peter. It's a beautiful church inside, as you can see. And at the very end, at the high altar, at the very base of the high altar, are these chains, reputedly supposed to be the chains that were attached to St. Peter when he was dragged into Rome by the Romans about to be executed. But this church is really known for this. This is a piece of sculpture that was done by Michelangelo for Julius II's tomb. This is Moses, as you can see there in the lower part, in the middle, with the sculptures of Leah and Rachel on either side. And here's a better view, and this is one of Michelangelo's great pieces of sculpture. So in Rome, you have the Pieta, and you also have his Moses, two really amazing pieces of sculpture. And this is extraordinary with Moses in his hand intertwined in his beard. And I don't know how he did this. Next week's show is going to be just on Michelangelo in Florence, and my guest will be my friend Rick, who is a sculptor, and will tell us a little bit perhaps on how Michelangelo may have done this incredible piece of work. Okay, so here we are back at the Via dei Fori Imperiali, and we're headed towards this piazza. This is the Piazza Venezia, and that monument in the back is the monument to Victor Emmanuel, who was one of the prime movers in the unification of Italy from its city-states in the year 1870. This is a very nice piazza, but this, you got to be careful here crossing the street because the cars are whizzing around here as well. This is what the piazza looks like looking in the other direction, and this is the Palazzo Venezia, the palazzo that dominates that piazza, where the name of the piazza gets its name. And this is where Mussolini, from this balcony, would address the Roman people. And he built the Via dei Fori Imperiali to connect the Colosseum to this spot so he could drive in his car, with the top down, and people could see what a great leader he was. And he'd get to the end of this, and he knocked down a lot of ancient Roman monuments in order to create this street. And then he would stand on the balcony and harangue the people of Italy. Now we're in the Piazza Navona, and this is where we went when we were there in 2010. After this whole experience, we went into the Piazza Navona, which is one of the great piazzas in Rome, where you see some great fountains. And the one in the middle there is the Fountain of the Four Rivers. And there are stores around the side. There are restaurants, cafes. There's gelato stands, and it's just a great place to hang out. Laura and I once saw a performance here by an outdoor performer who was just marvelous. And this is why people hang out sometimes in these piazzas, because you get these outdoor performers. Here's another view of it as it's getting more towards evening. Okay, now do we have time? I have two little videos. I'm going to show them. If you have the time, when you're in Rome and you want to see a more well-preserved ancient site and you don't want to get down to Pompeii, you could go over here to Ostia, Antica. And this is a video I took of that. And again, Ellen, you could play the sound on this, because this is one where I think I know what I'm talking about, because I get to some of these places and I'm not sure, but let's play the sound on this.
We are in Ostia, Antica. This was the ancient Roman seaport, and it's a fairly well-preserved city on the coast. And we're now walking through the gymnasium area where the athletes had all kinds of activities like wrestling and so on. This is an example of what Ostia looks like. Columns, a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff here.
Oh, look, there's something written.
Okay, let me stop there.
Is that old?
Because this is what the ancient Roman seaport at Ostia looked like. And although it's still in ruins, it's not in as bad ruin situation as Rome is. And this is another very fast video. No sound on this because I say something which isn't true, so I'll correct that I'll do my own commentary here. This was the theater in Ostia Antica. Look at this. This is like very, very well preserved theater. That's the stage, what the stage looked like. And this is where the Romans used to see live performances. And it's pretty amazing looking. You can picture the performers up on the stage, the columns around it, and those faces above. And this is what the ancient, and there's Laura over there looking at the stage, and that's where the people used to sit. And this is about 40 minutes from the center of Rome. So if you ever want to go and see what an ancient Roman town looked like, this is where you would do it, at Ostia Antica. And that brings us to the end of tonight's show. So I'd like to say to you, thank you very much for watching. It was a pleasure for me to bring Rome to you. I know I hurried up a little bit tonight, but I wanted to get through that. And I like the phone call, so keep doing that. And I bid you fond farewell, good night, and I hope to see you next week.